Hi guys, we're going to do a flashing light circuit. We're going to solder this up for our games project. I'd recommend you have a look at the end of this video of the project working, so we know where we're going, and then come back to this point so we can identify all our components. We've got a few different components here. So we've got the transistors. Have a really close look at the back of the transistors. It's not going to focus in the video, I don't think, but on the back side there'll be a little number. Two of them are different, so put the two together that are the same, and the third one, just put that off to the side because that's going to be a different one. The one that's different goes into the V. I need to have a look at this. So these ones here are for our transistors, and we've got V1, V2 and V3. The one that's unique will go into the V3 position. So if we look at the parts list here, these are our transistors. You can see V3 is the S8050, when the V1 and V2 are the S9013. It's really important that these are in the right direction, and you can see on the printed circuit board you've got this little curve here. If you look at the end of it, it's pretty self-explanatory that the curve needs to fit which way these go. So two go facing this direction, one goes facing the other direction. Let's have a look at the electrolytic capacitors, so C1, C2 and C3. You can see where they go here, C1, 1, 2 and 3. These ones are important as well. You can see there's a negative sign here, that will be on the shorter leg, and the positive is always the longer leg. So make sure they go in the right direction when you get to soldering them together. The ground, or what's the negative here, goes against where the white coloured section is here, so that should make it fairly easy to identify that. They're all the same capacitance, so you can see the 47 UF there, they're all the same. We've got two different types of resistors, so we've got the 10K and we've got the 170 ohm resistors. So let's have a look on our pieces here. I think I'm missing one out of my kit. I'll have to have a look for it in a second, but we've got one that is yellow purple brown, and the other one is orange black brown. We'll have to identify that using the color codes on the resistor color code. The final components that we have are the LEDs. We've got the anode and the cathode, so the positive and the ground. The positive is always the larger, longer leg. When we line up these LEDs, you can see that there's a flat side on the printed circuit board diagram, so a little flat here. That's going to be the negative. The other way we can identify, if you look straight down on the LED, it's a little bit hard to see with the focus of the camera. There's going to be a little flat side on one side of the LED. That should correspond with the short leg. So the short leg needs to go through on the side of the flat of the drawing on the printed circuit board. The last thing that we've got in our kit is the little connector point here. We're not going to talk about that until the end. That's just so we can connect our power so it will function. I'm going to start with the flattest components to solder them in. So I'm going to do the 470 ohm resistors. We're going to have to give these a bend, so we'll bend it kind of just slightly on both sides up against the resistor, and then we're going to feed it through our 470. So these ones are the ones with the yellow, purple, brown code. Make sure you get that in the right spot. I can feed them all through, so make sure you're getting them in the right position. So bend the legs, put them in, and I'll show you how to solder on the other side. So they're in place. It doesn't matter for resistors which direction they go, it's the same. It will limit the current going through. I've lined up so the color codes are all facing the same way. It just looks nicer that way. On the back, I've bent the legs out to about 45 degrees. That stops the components from falling out when I hold it upside down to solder. I'm going to place it on the mat and I'll show you how to solder that. It's really important that we shine up our soldering iron tip. We want a nice clean tip on the end. Now we need to heat up the printed circuit board and the component leg. So I'm going to bring my soldering iron in so it's touching both, heat it up for about 5 seconds and then feed the solder in. So you should get a nice little kind of volcano kind of shape that kind of tapers up the leg. Hold it for a few seconds. I didn't have enough heat with this one on the board. You might want to put it in a clamp as well. So my soldering iron's not quite hot enough yet. I'll keep wiping my soldering iron to shine up that tip to make sure the heat transfer is as good as it can be. So make sure you heat up the printed circuit board as well as the component leg and bring the solder in between the two. Shouldn't see any big blobs at this stage. It should be nice and controlled and the smallest amount of solder you can to do the job. Once the components are done, we need to take off the excess material. Make sure you have your safety glasses on when you do this because they will likely kind of fly off a little bit. These side cutters are a little bit dull, so they're not going too far. So there's my nice neat soldering of the first 3 resistors. I've continued to put the other resistors in, so these ones are the 10K, and I'm going to solder the ends on this side. So those ones are soldered in and trimmed off, nice and flush and neat, no excess solder. If you overheat some of these pads, it's likely they will delaminate from the board, so be extra careful not to put too much heat into the components. Some components are a bit more heat sensitive, so the transistors too. If you put too much heat through that component, it will stop functioning, so only apply as much heat as you need to melt that solder into position. The next components are going to be the transistors, so remember that we have 2 different positions. Let's locate the S8050 and we'll try and put that into the V3 position to start with. Make sure you're putting it in the right direction, so in line with the little kind of semicircle, and these ones need to be pushed down so they're just a little way off the board. Don't force it down the whole way, and then the outer 2 legs we're going to bend them out just slightly like that. So that one's soldered and trimmed. The other 2 are exactly the same, so let's pop them in. Make sure they're the right direction. They alternate between V1 and V2. One's facing one way and one's facing the other. It's really important once you've soldered these to double check there's no connection between these points. If you have put too much solder on and they join together, it creates a short circuit. The current will just flow between the solder where the components should be separate. It'll skip the component and your circuit won't function properly. So I've soldered them in and I've trimmed them off. Next thing to do is the capacitors. So like I said before, you need to make sure the negative is against this shaded component. The negative is the short leg, so we'll push that one through. These are all the same, they're the 47 microfarad, so let's put them in, and then you can solder the back just the same. Remember, you don't have to push these in too far, they don't have to go the whole way down. The components are, these ones do actually fit really nicely, so yeah, you can push them pretty close to the flush to the board. I've bent out the legs just the same as what we did for the resistors, that way they won't fall out. Let's solder that together. Be really gentle with the components once they're soldered in, because if you bend them more than once, so you bend them back and forward a couple of times, they will break off above the circuit, and the solder is really hard to reconnect. So just be gentle with your circuit as it's going together. So for this one, the board is designed that all the LEDs sit upright, and then you could mount this as say a scoreboard or some kind of system. It is possible, it's probably not the best practice, but it's possible to actually solder these in the back of the board. So I could put, as long as my negative, which is the shorter leg, is coming to the shorter, where the flat is of the symbol, we could mount it on this side of the board. That way, if we were going to glue this onto a game, we can have the board kind of illuminate from this side, where all the working for the circuit is on the other side. Take your time fitting the LEDs, because if you get one around the wrong way, this circuit's not going to work. So double check each one as you put it in, make sure they're facing the right direction. There's a little flat section, you can see right next to my thumbnail, there's a little flat section on the LED legs. I'm going to use that as an indicator, so I'm going to sit that just above the board, and I'm going to double check the height of each one as I put them in. So this time I'm not going to bend the bottom legs, I'm just going to go really slowly fitting these and make sure it's pushed down to that little flat section on the LED leg. Once you've done that, maybe 3 at a time, you can solder them together, and then we'll check if the circuit works. Just a quick note as well,